Let's go back to the 1970s and 80s. The black leather gloved hand tightens the silencer onto the pistol. And then two near silent shots, right? All the bad guys in the movies when we were kids did that. And man, they seem so quiet. Are they? Today we're going to talk all things silencers. What? They're not silencers, they're suppressors. Well, go back in time and tell that to Mr. Hiram Maxim, the inventor of the silencer. Today we've got Dave, owner and CEO of Silencer Shop, which is the biggest seller of these items in the country. They process more paperwork than anybody else, and we are going to talk about everything from legislation that's changing the landscape of ownership to the legal side of things, to taking care of them and best practices, as well as the history of. Let's dig right into all things silencers. Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Hey all, welcome to yet another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. We've got a pretty interesting discussion today with Mr. Dave Matheny. Is that how I'm saying it right?
Yep.
I didn't mess it up this time. Of the Silencer Shop, which I believe is the largest, you guys are the largest seller of suppressors in the nation.
That's right. Yep, by a pretty wide margin.
That's cool. Well, I want to talk about you. I want to talk about what you guys do. Let's start with you. How does a guy go into the business of becoming the largest purveyor of silencers?
I know it actually, it's crazy, and I'll abbreviate this a lot. I was in tech, had a son born with I was a computer programmer, right? I'm the guy you lock in a closet and code comes out. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. But my son was born 100% deaf in one ear, 100% good in the other. And when we bought the silencer for him, had a couple bad experiences and started Silencer Shop thinking it would be a small side thing. And it really, really exploded. Kind of the whole silencer ownership simplified.
Go back a second. What do you mean you had some bad experiences? Like bought the wrong product, the product didn't work?
On the first one that I bought, I bought it from a guy online and had a local person do the transfer. The guy locally doing the transfer went out of business during the process.
Oh,
ATF came in and shut him down. I was lucky to get that can at all, right? The second one, they wouldn't help me with the paperwork at all. So, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I got an error letter. They wouldn't help me with that. That whole process was a mess. And by the time I got it, they had actually given me a different can than the one that I thought I was buying, right? So both experiences were pretty bad in different ways, right?
So you decided, I'm going to try to help people not have the experience you did. So I live in a state, I'm in Illinois. What is there, 42 states that have some type of law that allows them. So I'm in one of the 8 that does not, unless you're law enforcement or a manufacturer or FFL, or have some other special licensing, which I don't know about. I've done some research on this stuff over the years. It's interesting. So Hiram Maxim, you know this stuff. The guy that created the machine gun, his son is the guy that created the silencer, and that's what he called it, right? We know that they're suppressors. I was just reading up on this last night again, and it's fascinating. I think their uncle was the guy that created smokeless powder, which I don't think I ever knew.
So they also worked on inventing the car muffler. I mean, a lot of stuff came out of that family.
So the silencer, Hiram, his company still exists to this day, making stuff for machinery to silence engines and things like that. But it sounds like at first he makes these things to be quiet. President Roosevelt had one on a lever action that he didn't want to annoy his neighbors as he was out probably smoking squirrels on Long Island where he lived. And then a few years later, the government says, hey, we've got to control these with the 1934 Firearms Act, right?
Yep.
And
it was sort of an accident of history that they even wound up in there.
How's that?
It's that the NFA, or as originally envisioned, was intended to ban handguns. So they wanted to do machine guns and handguns. And the Supreme Court wouldn't let him go that far, couldn't ban handguns. So you wound up with this whole conglomeration of stuff that didn't make any sense. Short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, Silencers got thrown in almost as a last minute thing to help control poaching. Right. The whole law didn't make sense even at the time.
So I read an article last night that was written in 2016. And in 2016, so they create the tax stamp. So basically, anybody that's not rich can't afford one of these.
Yeah.
At the time, they said in 2016, $200 in 1934 would be analogous to, I think it said $3,600 in 2016 money. So that's probably what, $9 million
Yeah.
now
That's right.
with inflation. But that's a pretty ridiculous thing. I mean, who could even afford it? So Roosevelt had one, but like, who actually was even using them back in those days?
Yeah, and really, once the NFA passed, nobody was using them. And that's why there's such a negative impression of them now, because nobody had them for so long because of that tax, that the only way we learned about silencers was through TV. So it really is, it's a weird industry because of that. All the information the average person has is from TV, even gun owners.
Hmm, that's interesting. So you got involved from the selling perspective. You guys don't manufacture any silencers, is that right, Dave?
No, we don't.
So you guys just go out and source them from all the different
That's
manufacturers,
right.
local place, and then your business helps facilitate the paperwork process.
That's right.
So what's that look like? So a person lives in one of the 42 states. Say I live in Wisconsin. I go on your website, I find the item that I want, and then what?
So basically, when you buy your first silencer through us, you go through one of our kiosks. We've got, I'm going to say we're approaching 3,000 kiosks nationally. So there's usually one close to almost everybody, right? You go to your kiosk, put your information in, takes, I'm going to say 5 to 10 minutes for most people. Then we handle the submissions from then on out. You only have to go to the kiosk once, but we get all your information, your fingerprints, we take care of your photo, we review everything to make sure it's right, and we make sure everything gets submitted to the ATF quickly and correctly. Right. That's really our business, is automating
So,
that part of the process.
so a guy or a girl, they could own a room full of stuff like this. I happen to have a beautiful long range bolt gun sitting on the bench here. You could own something, a whole wall full of those. And then if I want to buy a small metal tube with threads on the end, I've got to give
Yeah.
my fingerprints. What else?
Yep. It's fingerprints, photo, submit all the paperwork. Most people, it's a good idea to buy as a trust, so that needs to go with it. So it's getting all that paperwork together and making sure it's right before
Talk
you
about
submit it to
talk
ATF.
about why you would need a trust. I mean, this is lunacy to me, and it's fun to talk about from just the perspective of red tape of government. You go
Yeah.
out, go to a local Walmart and buy a 30-06 that you could shoot something 1,000 yards away with, or a 7 millimeter or something. Walmart sells this stuff. But if I want to screw a tube on the end that makes it a little more comfortable to shoot, I've now got to get a trust, a legal trust. I've got to do fingerprints, pictures. So what is all of this?
Yeah. So really the as far as the thing to keep in mind with silencers, just in general, is it is a registry, right? So when you go, guns, firearms in general in America are not registered. You go buy a gun, there's no registration for that gun. You buy it, you can sell it to another person in most states. You can really do whatever you want with it, share it with family members, pass it down to your kids, whatever. Once the firearm is registered, it's registered to a specific person or entity. And that's where the trust comes in. So if you have, let's say you buy a silencer as an individual, and then you ended up using it in a self-defense type situation, which they make a ton of sense for home defense. But it's a, let's say you use it in a home defense situation, your wife does, and you're not home, and you register as an individual, she's committing a felony in a self-defense situation. Whereas if you register as a trust, anybody you write on the trust can have possession of it independently. That's where
So
the
talk
trust
about
really shines.
so talk about that. Like a guy goes to the range with some buddies, and one of them legally owns a suppressor, and he's got it screwed onto the end of an AR, and we're doing some shooting, and the guy with the lawfully owned suppressor says, "Hey, do you want to shoot this?" And that guy handles the rifle. Is that a felony? Or is it
No, not at all. As long as you're there, you're
okay?
fine, right? The problem comes when you're not there. So
Okay.
somebody using it and it's not in your quote control, right? You're not around to like see it and manage it. Then you run into problems. That's where the trust comes in.
Has there ever been an instance, Dave, where somebody's had the AR or pistol with a suppressor on it? The spouse or a significant other or loved one used the gun in self-defense, and then they were uh, prosecuted for that.
Yeah, I'll tell you right as of right now, I'm not aware of anything like that.
That seems
So,
like it'd
but
be a pretty minute chance of that happening.
you have to keep in mind that most of the states where they would actually do that kind of thing, silencers aren't legal anyway. But as you think about the future, you really do have to think about these things do change over time. Just because right now nobody's pursuing that doesn't mean that in 10 years they won't be, right? Because politics, things just tend to shift. So that's why it's just better to be safe for such an easy thing, right?
Hmm.
Throw it in a trust, let the trust own it, right?
So once you do that, do you guys help with the trust creation, or does the customer need to go see an attorney? How does that work?
Yeah, now we set that up. It's completely automated and it's part of the submission process. So
Okay.
I will say the one thing right now, this hasn't been true in the past, but right now, if you buy a suppressor just normally as an individual, we're getting our approvals back in a matter of days. Like it can be a 1 day, it can be 4 days. I mean, we're getting it back super fast for individuals. Trusts, we're actually looking at closer to the 3 month line, which last year we would have been super happy about 3 month approvals, but there's a big difference between approval times right now, which is pushing a lot of people towards the individual registration. Although personally, like I said before, I still recommend the trust to pretty much everybody. It's worth adding on a couple of months of wait.
Hmm. Hmm. Can somebody purchase personally and then transfer into a trust?
You can. So you can buy it like as an individual, take possession of it, transfer to a trust, but that's another set of paperwork, another $200 tax, and another waiting period, right?
I see.
So there's
So another waiting period. Do I have to take the can and go hand it
no,
in?
no, no. I'm just saying it doesn't transfer instantly. You as an individual still have possession of it during the waiting period, but it just is a waiting period, right? Before the trust owns it. You don't submit the paperwork and get it back today, is what I'm saying.
This kiosk thing is interesting. So you've got uh, like vendors, these gun shops, Bass Pro shops, like that kind of thing around the country where you've got computers set up.
Yeah, and we're not really doing it in big box. We're doing it in most of your local gun stores. A lot of
Okay.
regional like chains, we're in those. A lot of your gun stores, you walk into most gun stores that sell silencers and you'll see one of our kiosks there. And that's how they use us to process their paperwork.
Okay. So can somebody go on your website and find, is you got a search engine on there? You punch a
Yep,
zip code or something in?
absolutely. Yeah. And then we have currently about 6,500 dealers and almost 3,000 kiosks. So you can sort by who has a kiosk, who does more transfers. We rank our dealers based on reviews and distance and all that stuff, right? So you can find a dealer within most people within minutes of their house, even one with a kiosk,
So as a business
but
guy
not in
myself,
Illinois.
not Illinois, right? So you're a, if I go to like Bob's local gun store and Bob's local gun store is one of your dealers, they are a dealer for Silencer Shop, and Silencer Shop might be a dealer for Silencer Co.
That's
So
right.
why not just go to Bob's gun store and have Silencer Co. sell me? Why do I need to go through this extra layer of the Silencer Shop?
There's actually not an extra layer. So the gun store, when the gun store is buying silencers to sell in their store, they're not buying from Silencer Co. They're buying from a distributor, which is us,
Okay.
right? If you buy on our website, the dealer is still getting paid as if you bought it in their store. The
And I
dealer
just
set the price on our site.
so
Oh,
the
go
same
ahead.
way guns work.
Yeah. We're basically we're not really a middleman. We're a distributor, right? I guess you can call a distributor a middleman, but because of all the paperwork required in moving silencers, not just to customers, but also from place to place, we provide a service for the manufacturers as well, right?
Sure, sure. I just wanted you to explain that so we all understood. Same thing when you go to Bob's gun store, that guy's not buying most of the time directly from Colt or Glock or somebody like that. I
Right.
know that there's some monster gun stores. There's one by me called Gat Guns, and I know that they work directly with a lot of manufacturers, but that's not most
That's
gun
right.
stores. So legislative side of things. Uh, I'm sure you don't like all of this red tape. You've created a business around it, which is cool, but can we get rid of it? Should we get rid
I
of it?
actually, personally, I'll tell you my personal opinion is that someday this should go away. There are a couple of big headwinds to that right now. One of them is if you look at like national polling around silencers, there's an 80% negative. 80% of the population, whereas guns are 50-50, right? But with silencers, 80% negative, which makes it really hard to actually change any legislation.
People
I think
think
the
of like
key,
the black leather
they
glove
do.
assassin
Yes.
tightening the can onto
Yep.
the yeah.
Even gun owners, even though more and more gun owners know they're legal, gun owners haven't really accepted that they're useful yet, right?
Mm.
And hunters for sure, every hunter should be using them. But then you throw in states like California, Illinois, where people just can't get them, right? So this 80% negative is kind of hanging over our heads. I think if we can grow the market, that's why we're actually in the process of suing the state of Illinois right now to force Illinois to allow silencer ownership, right?
So
The,
silencer shop is, or is there like an industry conglomerate that's doing it?
it's through the ASA Foundation. We're funding it, so we're
Very
very
cool.
involved in it. That's right.
Let's
So there's
let
a
me derail you for a second. What's the ASA?
American
American
Suppressor
Silencer
Association.
Association? Okay.
Suppressor, yeah, exactly. So, and they're the organization that really kind of represents the industry, right? And it's kind of pushing for really the end goal of getting these things out of the NFA. I do think long term, I think that's a realistic goal. And the reality is, you look at what people are saying now, like, oh, silencers should be sold like guns, and silencers should be sold like flashlights. I'll be honest, there should be no regulation on a silencer, like zero. You should be able to go to Walmart and buy them off a shelf, right? But the reality is that's not how the raw law is written. So the goal is to grow the industry to a point where we can actually get silencers out of the NFA and out of regulation in general.
So let's talk about that from a business standpoint. Like there, you're in kind of a juxtaposition. You take what's a run of the mill rifle suppressor cost? $1,000, fifteen
Yeah,
hundred
eight
bucks,
hundred, 800
800.
bucks.
Okay,
Sometimes
so
less, but yeah.
I've got a lot of friends in the fabrication business that look at these things, and I know there's cost of engineering, the manufacturing costs, owning the equipment, all of those things have to be factored in. But a lot of these things are pretty simple devices. If they were deregulated, wouldn't the cost be driven way, way down?
Yep, I agree. It'd be like it very similar to flashlights. Once again, there are flashlights out there that cost 4, 5, 600 bucks, right? But the reality is most flashlights cost like 15, right? Or 10.
Sure.
So it's and I think you would see the same thing in silencers. Right now, when people buy a silencer, they tend to think of it because of the way it's registered, people tend to think in terms of I'm gonna own this forever, right? Whereas if the volume of the market were, let's say they got deregulated, the market grew by 500%. I made up that obviously, but whatever. Prices would drop because there's more volume, and you would see different quality tiers. You would have a lot of them that would just be throwaway. You use it for one hunting season and it's falling apart, right? You'd get others that you buy them and they are an investment. They're great can accuracy, all that. Right now, all of the suppressors out there tend to fall into the really high quality. There aren't very many exceptions to that at all because of the registration process.
Sure. So what you're saying is that the deregulation would open up the market for more affordable options where somebody's going to buy one that's $200 and maybe maybe they only shoot a couple times a year. They take the gun out to deer camp and it's going to last them a long time and they don't need this super high grade product.
Yeah, yeah. I think $200 might even be high. I think we'd see products in the $50 range, right? But
Makes sense.
you're you're starting to get down to the throwaway at that point, right? Where maybe you shoot it for one season and then it just isn't working anymore. The accuracy's falling apart, the can is starting to warp. So I mean, who knows what would happen? But I suspect the quality would drop with those lower price tiers.
So you're going to know a lot about what I'm about to talk about. A few years back, Congress was um, looking at this. My home state of Illinois was looking at it very hard on passing legislation to allow suppressors. And then we had the psychotic, horrific shooting in Las Vegas, which, changed the narrative immediately across the board. Lots of uh, conspiratorial ideas coming out of that. Which I'm not going to derail the conversation into that. But like I know in Illinois, I was working with a couple of the guys that were championing that legislation. Um, it's very interesting because legislators, and I've been to my state capital more times than I can count working on such things. Oftentimes they have zero idea of what they're even talking about. Um, they know that their voters, their constituents, are not going to like it, so they just don't do it. They're not educating the people in their community, like, hey, here's why I'm going to vote this way, or here's why we should take another look at it. Why is there so many misconceptions? Why can we not educate people on this? Like Europe, I've got lots of friends from Europe that think we're idiots.
I
That
know.
we're not, it goes the other way where people are mandated to use them.
That's right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And it kind of goes back to people have gotten their information about silencers from the news. Politicians aren't, I don't see politicians educating people on any subject, right? What I see is
Right.
politicians just voting the way their people go so they can get elected the next time. So it's very, I'm not going to say slimy, but I think educating politicians isn't going to help. You have to educate the end. We have to be responsible for educating the average gun owner,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Which is hard to do in a state like Illinois because right now, once again, you guys can't get them.
right.
So it's California, Illinois, and New York. You get them into some of these big states, and I think we can start shifting this 80-20, right? And increasing the market or the percentage of ownership in the states where they are legal.
Makes sense. What's the big challenge? So ASA, were you one of the founders of this organization?
Nope, I am on the board. I was not a founder.
Okay. How long's it been around?
I'm going to say since maybe it was early 2010s. I don't know how you say that.
Okay. All
You
right.
know what I
So
mean?
10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, every industry, it's amazing. You get into anything, corn seeding machines, and there's probably a corn seeding machine
I
maker
know.
association of America, right?
That's exactly right.
Guys have these groups, and sometimes I've been involved in these things, and it seems like it's more for guys to get together and drink coffee or have cocktail parties and rub elbows and talk about their last safari and looking at each other's Rolexes than it is uh, doing anything. What's the thrust of the organization? What are they doing? What are they trying to do? What is the mechanism? So the lawsuit, I want to hear about that some more too.
Yeah. I tell you what, ASA does really well is they have done an incredible job at the state levels. They were involved a few years ago, like you mentioned, when that Illinois legalization stuff was going on. Honestly, there was a time where we actually thought that was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the lawsuit is another big one, but really, you look at across the country, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't even legal to hunt game animals in Texas with a silencer. So the ASA has made these changes across the country. They've gotten the suppressors legalized in quite a few states. They've gotten hunting legalized in almost every state where the silencers are legal. They've done a fantastic job at the state level. They've also done a really good job as an interface to the ATF. right?
Hmm.
So kind of helping drive a lot of these process changes and dealing with internal issues at ATF just to kind of keep them, I guess, as much as it can, as much as possible on our side, right?
Hmm.
At the federal level, I'm not. Man, I tell you, silencers at the federal level are a scary thing because if you go to dig into any of these laws right now, even to try to make positive changes, it can backfire on you bad, right? There's kind of and that's scary. So they haven't done much at the federal level, but they have done a lot at the state and yeah, at the state level, really.
I understand what you're saying. You start to open up Pandora's box on things, and it's a legislation is always give and take. I was just talking
Yeah,
with some of our viewers about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. You probably know some of this. Like there was people that didn't want a constitution. There were people that wanted a constitution. These were our founders. They weren't obscure figures. So I think gun owners, we have this fallacy idea of our history. Like everybody loved guns, everybody loved, everything we loved. And the fact is, they didn't. There were a lot of uh, folks that didn't want a revolution. There were a lot of folks that were not for pulling away from the crown. And there are a lot of gun owners that are not really pro gun or pro liberty or pro constitution or pro Bill of Rights. So it's pretty easy. And when you start that give and take for them to say, fine, we'll pass this, but now
yeah.
we want this other thing, like national registration of
AR-15s.
yeah, ARs or some crap like that. Yeah, yeah.
That's a scary thing right there. But you're exactly right. Let's say you go in to pull silencers out of the NFA, that's your intention. It's not hard to have that switch to that $200 tax stamps gets adjusted for inflation,
Mm.
right? So I mean, these changes are scary, especially with an 80% negative, right? The changes are scary at the federal level.
So this lawsuit, let's go to that real quick. I've I've presided over a not-for-profit that existed to proliferate concealed carry laws. Uh, Heller versus DC, McDonald versus Chicago. I knew Otis McDonald personally, lovely man when he was alive. His family is great people. How do you make something like that happen? Uh, there's so many moving parts to that. So you guys chose Illinois. Why not California? Why not New York? Why not one of these other places?
It was really the court makeup was a big piece of it.
Okay.
And I'll tell you right out the gate, we drew a fantastic judge. We couldn't have gotten luckier on that. But I really think there's a good shot that this case that we win, right? Now, I will say there's also a good chance it gets appealed. If we lose, we'll appeal for sure. If we win, there's a chance that Illinois will appeal. They'll do the math on whether an appeal will force this change in other states, right? You kind of know how that works.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you go through Illinois first, then you go to California or
Mm-hmm.
pick another state, right, to get it into a different court and kind of force it at some point to move up the chain and get a
Yeah,
national ruling.
I dig that. What is the basis of the case? What are you guys arguing? What's the thrust of it?
Really, it's that this is a we're really going under the whole premise of this is a constitutionally protected item. The state can't straight up ban it, right? That's really the crux of it. So one side effect of the NFA from 1934 is they did define a silencer as a firearm, right? Which is kind of an interesting, it's clearly not a firearm, but it's
This
sort of,
cardboard is a spaceship.
you know what? And I knew that. I saw that on your table earlier. I thought, send that to me
That guy's got a
after.
spaceship on his table. There's so many memes now that are funny, like or you see these different YouTube channels taking like 5 guns that look similar, and they're like, "This is an SBR. This one's
That's
legal.
right.
This one's not." And you're like, most of us kind of know some of those idiotic nuances, but it is idiotic.
And on that point, And I tell you, you look at those pictures, sometimes you can't tell. So you really have to almost handle it in person to see what's an SBR and what's
Mhm.
not an SBR in some cases. Yeah,
Mhm.
this stuff's crazy, but that's really the crux of what we're saying. They can't. There's a federally protected or a constitutionally protected item. They can't ban them.
Are you arguing, hey, 42 other state legislatures have looked at this and said the same thing we're saying, thus there must be something to this argument?
That's right. Yeah, I mean there are actually a lot of arguments on our side, right? So this is I really have a I'm very positive about this lawsuit in Illinois. Now the timing, I wish it were moving faster, but that's just how the courts are.
Sure.
But I'm hoping this comes out in our favor.
I hope it does too. That would be fantastic. I was out on the East Coast a couple years ago teaching a class, and in the class we had some township cops, some city cops, some state cops. There was a couple guys from various federal agencies, like U.S. Parks, and there was some guys from Department of Homeland Security. There was a guy from the U.S. Postal Police Agency there, and we're just kind of chatting on firearm laws, like interstate stuff, magazine stuff. And the locale that we were in, every one of them lived there. So they all lived in that state. I'm not going to say what state it is, but there was zero consensus. There was 8 or 10 guys, and I'm laughing because, like, a couple of them kind of like led the way. They're like, no, 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 statute such and such says this, and somebody else, chimed in. And there was a couple guys that were quiet because they were like, I don't freaking know anything about these laws. It's not what I work on. But there was zero consensus, and these were not like specific or hard laws. It was like, what happens if a person that's a resident of another state is pulled over transporting a firearm that's cased and unloaded, and even locked in the trunk? What happens if they get pulled over in your state and law enforcement for some reason knows that they have the gun? And it was like anything from nothing it's allowed to 4 felonies and they're going to be locked up. And it's insane, the discrepancy in knowledge of these laws all across the board, not just law enforcement, but by the public, prosecution wise. But like the way I see it, we have created a situation like with suppressors. They can be used for evil. The gun can be used for evil. Uh, the Do you keep any kind of an inventory of uh, stories of cans used in crimes?
Yeah, the thing is, there are so few, right? It really is. It is so rare for a silencer to be used in a crime. And I'm pretty convinced that part of it is, you look at the advantages of a silencer, better accuracy, lower recoil, uh, just more enjoyable to shoot, hearing safe. But then you look at the flip side of that, and man, they're still as loud as a jackhammer on concrete on an AR-15, right? They're
Mhm.
not silent at all. They make the gun, call it 6 or 8 inches longer.
Heavier,
They're
longer.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. So then you try to conceal it. Let's say you try to put it under your jacket after you shot it, you're going to burn the crap out of yourself.
Right, right.
So they just don't lend themselves to crime, right? In my personal opinion.
I don't
On
disagree.
TV, they do. On TV,
Right.
they're the perfect assassin tool, but that's just not reality.
It's for those of you that have never shot a suppressor. If you screw one onto an AR-15 or a bolt gun and you run a half a dozen rounds through it and touch it with your bare hand, you will
Yeah,
never do that again. If you do a mag dump, there will be smoke cooking
yeah,
off of it, even
that's
with a
right.
pistol. Even with a pistol. Yeah, I've seen, I don't know
Yep.
how many of my classes, I've got guys that have like Nomex gloves and they're unscrewing things, and guys have like one dude always has some kind of cooled wrap. You probably know all about this, and he's cooling the thing down between courses of fire.
Yep, that's right. They do. They run hot. And it's you're converting that sound. It has to go somewhere. It goes into heat, right? So they get very, very hot. Some of the newer ones are actually dealing with that better, but they still get hot.
different materials and heat sink materials that are
You know,
transferring heat?
it's more how the gases are routed through the can in the 3D printed stuff, right? You and these flow through type cans, and that's a Huxworks like term, but that style of can is it actually you get less blowback and less heat. Sometimes you can get more sound pushed out the front, but even that is starting to get solved. They're actually pretty magical. Not to sidetrack on 3D cans, but they're pretty cool.
I'll talk about that. So years ago, we started out talking about Hiram Maxim. They were having to mill all this stuff with old school machining practices, lathes and milling machines. Uh, so there's only so much you can physically do inside of a tube to create such a thing. The 3D printing is allowing some other way of doing this.
Yeah, you can do things with 3D printing that just aren't possible with traditional manufacturing. It's actually really cool, and it's opened the doors to really another jump in performance. But having said that, your average buyer, the 3D cans are still out of reach price wise to the average buyer, right? So the traditional cans are still the way to go for most people. But give it a few years, I suspect they'll come down in price.
Sure, sure. Do they have the same longevity?
They do. Yeah, they'll hold up just as well. So one thing they've had to do with some of the 3D printed cans, because of the small channels and stuff within them, there are a lot of fluids available now that are specifically designed to drop the can in, let it soak, and get the carbon out of it. Whereas with a traditional can, you actually want that carbon to stay in. You don't want to clean them ever, right? The 3D cans are a little bit of a different story.
Talk about that. Why would you not want to clean it? And eventually you're going to build up so much carbon in there that there's nowhere for the gas to go, right?
You would think that the what happens is when you're shooting through any suppressor, there are really two things that are getting jammed in it, unless you drop in the mud or something dumb like that. Normal conditions, you're getting carbon buildup and you're getting lead residue. If you're shooting unjacketed ammo, like on rimfire, for example, or pistols, a lot of times you really do need to take it apart and clean it. That's why you see all the 22 cans. Take it apart, knock out that lead residue, and you're good. The carbon buildup, on the other hand, it actually just the way it creates that texture inside the can will actually make it run quieter. And once it builds up to a certain level, the pressure of shooting itself will knock that carbon out. So it'll only build
It's
up to a certain point. Yeah, it's like it. I would almost consider them to be self-cleaning. People do more damage on their rifle cans cleaning them than they ever do shooting them. So
It's like
I pretty
seasoning a pan. You're filling in the
sort
nooks
of
and crannies.
yeah, that's exactly right. It's like yeah, taking the pan that you've seasoned and scrubbing it with steel wool. Whoever owns
Right.
that pan would probably be pissed,
It's
right?
funny. So I own a firearm lubricant company. We own gunfighter gun oil, greases, cleaners, and things like that. And from time to time, I'll share a video on cleaning an AR bolt or lubing a Glock. And I could talk about the politics of guns and get less hate than if I talk about how to lube a Glock. You know, I mean, I've had people literally send me emails. You dumb mother effer. There is, you know, you can't read. You know, if Gaston Glock wanted it done that way, he would have done it. Blah blah blah. And so, like, you know, talking about some of this kind of maintenance stuff. I got a buddy, lovely dude. His name's Jerry. He was a Marine, went into law enforcement, 25 years as a deputy SWAT cop. Excellent, excellent man, good individual. But if you go shoot a round out of Jerry's gun, Jerry goes in the garage where he has a 55-gallon drum of CLP. Not an exaggeration. He invested in 55 gallons of CLP because, damn it, if that's what the Marine Corps used, that's what I'm using. And in his guns, there's no finish on them. He has polished the finish off of his guns from, you know, being a good Marine and making sure they're clean. I'm like, Jerry, you've got to oil them now because you've taken all the coating off of everything. Right. Yeah, like there's like a little bit of a mental illness where you like feel I've used it, I got to clean it.
That's right. Yeah, I do that with some of my guns. I mean, the guns I don't use as often, but for the most part, I have a clean gun safe and a dirty gun safe.
Sure.
Once a year, I clean everything in the dirty gun safe and move it back.
There you
So
go. It depends on what it is, right? Depends on what
that's
it is.
right.
I've got an old 870 blued finish, walnut stock. If that thing's out in the rain, I've got to pull all the wood
Yeah,
off
no,
of it. Yeah,
that's
like
right.
that's completely
So
different.
you do not, yeah, you leave something like that out in the rain and then bring it inside, you want to clean it right away, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm saying my normal like day-to-day guns, right? So anyway,
That's a it's a know your stuff kind of a thing. But
yeah.
so what's the like the next step? Your company, you guys are the largest purveyor of these things. Do you sell other products? Do you guys plan on eventually manufacturing your own? Is it a secret? Can you not talk about it?
No,
It's the,
I could talk about stuff. I actually don't want to get into manufacturing. That's just not. I know a lot of people approach us all the time with wanting house brands and whatever. I'm just not interested because I don't want to create myself. I don't want to become a competitor to our manufacturers, right? I want to be the guy who's enabling stuff to flow through the channels. So that we probably won't do. We have a lot of stuff in the works to simplify the process. So we have a whole dev team that's working on this stuff all the time. Faster submissions, more efficient submissions, branching into other areas, even into the broader firearms market. We have products in those spaces. So that's really where we're focused, improving processes and kind of branching into the broader firearms market. And part of the problem there is that for people in the firearms industry, for anybody who's in it, every company you deal with is a risk, right? Your credit card processor could cut you off tomorrow. The website hosting platform could shut you down. So
yeah.
it's those types of products you can get into just to kind of give these services to the firearms industry where we're kind of a safe space dedicated to the firearms industry, right?
Let's talk about some of that business stuff a little bit. So to go from uh, software writer to now building systems and processes to streamline the distribution and procurement of firearm suppressors, there's a big difference. Did you have a business background? Were you an entrepreneur?
No, and I seriously, weirdly enough, I'm the guy who always said I don't want to own a business. I like working for people. I like getting a paycheck. When I started this and it started kind of taking off, I made a comment to my wife along the lines of, "Man, if this keeps growing like this, I'm going to have to quit." Because it was about a year and a half where I was working at VMware as a programmer and running Silencer Shop, and she's like, "You're not quitting your job." Like, I was the opposite of an entrepreneur. Now that I've done it, I actually love it. I'm not sure I could go back, but I really, really do like it.
So at some point, you guys are making enough money, and you're like, "Can I quit? Am I allowed to quit now?"
Pretty much. Within 6 months of starting, we had an employee in our house, like walking through our living room. I'm sitting there writing code for VMware. He's taking calls, talking to people about silencers in the background. It was
I've been there.
yeah, it was a crazy time.
So how long ago did you start?
2010.
2010. Okay, so you've been around quite a while, as long as the ASA's been around. How many years until you got your own place and started packing on
We,
employees and got out of your other job?
it was about a year and a half. We started hiring employees about 6 months after getting it going. We got into our first building a year and a half after we got it started. So, and really it's been this upward trend that was crazy from the very beginning. But it was 2016 where we really kind of launched into the submitting two-thirds of all the silencers in the US, right? And that was Obama right before he got out. He pushed through a regulation change to change how silencers are registered. He made it more
Mhm.
complicated. And that's the problem we solved with our kiosk network, right?
So he tried to put a hurdle in front of the public, and you said, "We've got a workaround for your hurdle, legal, of course." And that probably helped you explode even more.
That's right. Yeah, that's what really got us into the market position that we're in now is that just kind of from the very beginning solving problems with software. So it scales better, right?
So you're really utilizing what you did before and plugging it into this space.
Yep. Yep. And it's interesting because my background, I told you I was in software, but I was a lower level guy, BIOS, firmware, the low level stuff that nobody sees. It makes your computer boot up and work, but nobody sees the code, right? So I went from that to writing, the systems for silencer shop. That was a pretty dramatic shift for me. But yeah, applying the same skills, yes.
So are you still the guy doing that?
No, it's actually been a couple of years now. We've got a team of people. I meet with them just like any other team, and they're doing all the work, right? It's actually been great.
Do you mind telling us how many people work for Silencer Shop?
I think we just passed the 90 people mark.
Okay,
So
so
it's,
really, really good size outfit.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun growing it.
So everything from front desk to people shipping and receiving product to management, sales, people scrubbing toilets, the whole gamut.
That's right.
And
Yep.
you're
And
in
it's a
you're in what state are you in, Dave?
Texas. We're just north of Austin.
Okay. Why bother wanting to be on podcasts? You got 90 people. You guys are the number one seller of sound suppressors, rifle handgun suppressors in the country. Why not just go do that? What message do you want people to know about what you do, about the brand, about whatever?
This really comes down to, like I was saying before, it's education. We've got almost 100 years of history where the only thing people learned about silencers has been through TV, right? So getting out there, kind of educating, talking about that part of it, the politics of it, just how easy they are to buy. There are a lot of misconceptions around that too, that man, these things are so complicated to buy, and they're not, right? So it's just getting that message out to the broader public, right? That's why we do this kind of stuff.
I dig it. I've got a lot of friends that have them. It's funny when I'll see people share something on their social media, like a picture, and they're like, I got out of jail. And those of us that don't go through that process don't understand. So this was very helpful. So the big scheme of things, we win this case. I say we because now I'm
Yeah, you're on board.
I'm invested in it. We win this case. Uh, Set some precedent there. Then you go and attack some of these other states. Is there any champions in Congress right now trying to push anything?
I'll tell you what, there are a lot of, in my personal opinion, there are a lot of pretty genuine good people in Congress, right? There are a lot of people who are just there for the politics.
Sure.
But then there's some people that legitimately understand the gun industry. They understand this stuff, right? So it'd be great if in politics people who understood issues would be the only ones voting on them, but that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I was just reading something last night. Um, John Adams, I believe it was John Adams. He was talking about uh, our bicameral government, and we're not a democracy; we are a republic. And one of the things he talked about, though, is we don't have every citizen vote on law. We have these representatives, and I'm just commenting on this to everybody. He specifically said, we the people are saying, hey, here's a group of humans that we feel know more about these big things than the rest of us, and they can invest their time in reading and researching and pondering and having tea parties and dinners and talk about this stuff to make better choices for the whole. And I, the citizen, am going to respect his or her right to do that. It seems like we need some more people that take that stuff seriously. It's so much politics and not enough governing and leadership.
and I agree with that mostly. I think I'll tell you, I think a big problem we got right now is the government has got its fingers in so many things
Oh yeah, heck
that
yeah.
no person can be an expert on all of it, right? It's just not possible. So then they delegated authority to these agencies, which have just gone crazy. So it's agencies making crap up that Congress should be deciding. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is government shouldn't even be involved in most of this stuff.
Right.
So it's really, man, government has got to shrink, right? And then get back to what you're saying. where the members of Congress are actually making decisions and being educated.
It's an interesting thing. I hear people say that, and I 1,000% agree, which isn't even a number that makes sense, but I agree. It's, I always say this: what would you cut? What would you cut? Like, here's a perfect example. I'm in a rural area. I could go out the back door of the office here and fire around at a steel target that's across the property right now, and nobody'd say or do anything. It's totally lawful. I can light a bonfire. I could take a helicopter off out the front yard if I want to. You pretty much do whatever. And there's a neighbor that's a dairy farm, and said dairy farmer takes all of the manure, and at night, because it's not proper, piles it up and just kind of dumps it on the edge of the road where a creek kind of pulls some of this poop away, and the rest of us just smell it all summer long. And it's his lawful right to do that, right? So it's like, here's a perfect example of government, right? There's township regulations. There's some EPA regulations because that poop's going in the water. There's probably some county regulations about like some agricultural and farming practices and nuisance stuff because he's running a tractor at night and creating like a health issue of piling up. And I'm not talking about a pile of poop like a wheelbarrow. I'm talking semi-truck loads of manure. So if the wind's right, it's like you're in a feedlot. Like things like that, that guy doesn't want to be messed with, but then I don't want to breathe shit. And
Yeah.
I'll give you one more example because this happens often. I'm a firearms instructor. Dave says, Mick, I own a family piece of land out in BFE hill country of Texas. Let's run a course out there. Okay, cool. My first question is it lawful? Is it safe? Yep, it's great. So we go out there, we're running guns. Bunch of us don't have cans. The neighbor's having a picnic the same weekend. They call the sheriff's office. Sheriff says it's legal. Neighbor goes, okay, well, this is annoying. All weekend, all I did was hear rifle fire. So they call their college buddy who's a litigator, and that guy goes to the county board, and now there's an injunction against Dave for running an unlawful rifle range or something like that. And it's my right, but it's their right to enjoy a peaceful weekend, right? Like, so comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think everything that we got right now, you look at the size of government, it all started from good intentions, right? I think right now it is really crossed the line where it's gone too far. And I think the first step, and I tell you, I'm getting out of my depth a little bit, so I'm going to be making crap up here. But my apparently, with all the politics and stuff this year, one of them was saying, "Man, let's just go through the entire federal government, pick a random number between 0 and 9, and lay off everybody whose social security number ends in that number." Because the other thing is government unions, right? So you wind up with these guys are actually growing agencies on purpose so they can retire at a higher level and make more in retirement. It's like the government has become a self-growing they're not even solving problems anymore. They're just growing government, right? And we've got to get that under control. And I'm not even sure that with either of those types of approaches that we would lose any services. We would just get them out of making up new crap, right? Because every agency is doing it.
I just talked to an old friend last night. I saw on social media that he joined a state police agency. He was in the Army for enough time to get an Army pension, did a bunch of that time as a like guardsman or reservist. So he was able to do that, and a county law enforcement job, which he retired from with a pension and was in a private sector job. And I messaged him. I said, did I just see that you went back into law enforcement? He goes, yeah, I got to get my third pension. And I said, you dirty son of a buck, man. Like, that is like that. I know somebody hear that and they say there's nothing wrong with that. If he's doing the work, like, yeah, I get it. There is something wrong with it when the whole point is that he's trying to create this funnel of what will be a couple $100,000 a year in pensions. And is it wrong from a legal sense? No, it's wrong when we look at government in that sense as a citizen. Like, I love the way General Washington, who was an imperfect man, could have become the emperor if he had wanted to. People loved that dude, and he went back and made whiskey and ran his plantation and did his thing, and he had his time, right? He did his thing. A lot of those guys, that was the way that they handled it. So many of those signers, they worked their ass off for 10 or 20 years for nothing. There was no money. And then they went back, often destitute and sick from stress and travel, riding horseback with cloaks on to go to Philadelphia or Boston to do the work. And there's no Air Force One, there was no Air Force Carriage One or whatever. These guys were,
That's right.
were just out there doing it. And you're right. The vastness of it, the biggest employer in America, right, is government.
Yeah, that's a problem too. And I think what you find is the bigger the government gets, the more it actually helps bigger businesses. So we're actually, because it's harder to get over the hurdles for the small startup to actually be compliant with everything. So I think we're actually hindering small business, which is the growth engine of America. That's what makes us America, right? So I don't know. I have a lot of problems with how big government has gotten. I think it's a real issue.
I like to play devil's advocate. I was in the construction industry for years. I'm a fifth generation carpenter. I noticed something on social media the other day. Somebody shared with me. It was an interesting little piece of a building envelope that helps control the spread of fire. And somebody's like, F that. I'd never spend the money to do that. And they were basically hemming and hawing about building codes. And I just commented a little blurb. I said, fire codes are pretty cool because we used to just see like whole cities burned down.
That's
and
right.
We don't see cities burned down. We barely see houses burned down, let alone two houses, unless it's like a big explosion. Usually, if a house burns, it's able to be contained. And doesn't mean I love every building code. There's a bunch of them that are onerous, but if left to our own devices, man, my buddy Z, Green Beret, he likes to remind us that we like to take the path of least resistance. Most humans do not say, I want the high road. I'm going to climb right over the top of the mountain, right? Most of us, we want to find the well-worn path. And so like, that's why we have legislation, right? The reason we have zoning laws is because some farmer dumps his crap on the side of the road, or we have noise ordinances because some dude's out running AR classes at night on a Saturday, and maybe that dude should have went and knocked on the door and said, hey, I know you and Martha are going to be sleeping this week. Here's a gift certificate for your favorite restaurant and a case of wine. Love you, don't hate me. Like if people just did that, it probably would alleviate a lot of those issues. But you go
Yeah, I'll
into
say though, and I think everything you're saying is right. But the
stop
federal
arguing
government,
with me, Dave, and just say
yeah,
I'm right. That's all that
okay,
matters.
you're right. You're right.
No, give me that
It's
pushback. I want to hear it.
the federal government's the problem. So if you got, like, you talk about building codes, the building codes in Miami shouldn't be the same as the building codes in rural Missouri, right?
100% agree.
So it's the federal government. If there's a place for them, it's that when you buy insulation that's rated for whatever, the federal government could potentially be stepping in and saying, yeah, that rating is real, right? But they shouldn't be telling you what insulation to use in your house at a local level, right? So I'm not saying there's no place for the feds. I'm just saying that it's kind of run amok, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we're the United States, where the federal government was just supposed to control the stuff that the states didn't and couldn't, like a navy or something like
Yeah.
that. But we have gotten ridiculously out of control. When you go to Washington or any place where there's large federal buildings and federal employment populations, uh, it's small cities unto themselves of just all the services required to make the stuff run. It's nuts.
Yep, that's right.
So what are we going to do to proliferate more silencers?
Man, I tell you, it's really it's education. I think these shorter wait times are helping a lot, right? Because the time hurdle, you think last year you bought a silencer and you said, what do I have to wait a year to get it? And that was true. This year you buy a silencer, you can get it in days if you register as an individual.
I don't know if you said why that is. What changed that it's days now?
A lot of it was process change at the ATF, right? There's not much more to it than that. No new systems, no grand change. It was more just how internally they handle their processes. But that tells you how inefficient the government can be, right? So but then on a dime, they switched it from a 9-month wait, and a month later, it was a 2-day wait. So it's
These
crazy.
things were just piling up on some
They
shelf
were.
somewhere and nobody was doing it.
That's right. That's right. Now they're just pressing people. They're getting them done, and man, they're getting them done faster than I've ever seen, and that's helping a lot to grow the market.
That's irritating, especially when I hate to pull this card, but we pay those people's salaries. Do
Yes, we
your
do.
job. I've got in Illinois, we've got a superfluous licensing scheme. It's called FOID, Firearm Owner Identification. Only a few states have it. A lot of people don't know Illinois was really like the leader in gun regulation when the assassination of Kennedy happened and the whole country was up in arms and was ready to pass more firearm laws. Uh, the state of Illinois created FOID at the same time that all these other laws were being passed on a federal level. And for some reason, COVID made it worse. But to have a concealed carry license in Illinois, you had to have a FOID card on you. So you had to have an up-to-date FOID, and then you had to have this little ID card, and you had to have a driver's license or ID. So it was just like basically you had to like carry around all these documents, and to reapply for one or update some information like a change of address, people were waiting a year or two, and the state police uh, while they're complaining they're undermanned, et cetera. All of a sudden, somebody filed some complaints, and it went from similar thing like a year or two to day or two. And it's like, well, what the hell did you
I know.
change that? Like, I'm not a genius here, and I'm assuming like if the cops aren't to blame, the legislature has enacted the rule that this stuff needs to happen, and then it's their job to facilitate it. Same with ATF. Uh, but what are you doing? And if you're so inept that you can't manage this, you should be fired. And then we should find somebody that can, or the ATF director or state police director should be going to Congress or the state and saying, what you're asking for, I can't do with the available resources to provide good service to the citizens.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So do you guys basically have like a constant communication with ATF? Like, is there people at your office that can pick the phone up and say, hey, it's Bob at Silencer Shop. I've got a problem or a question?
We do. I mean, we have to with the number of forms we submit, right? So it really is a pretty constant thing, trying to, as much as possible, make sure their systems are flowing as smoothly as possible, right?
Okay. Before I forget, this was something I wanted to talk about, like some do's and don'ts. How do people get themselves in trouble? Hot water, of course, falsifying documents and anything like that is a crime. That's not what I'm talking about. But like, where are some places, do's and don'ts kinds of things with applying for one of these items?
Yeah, I'll tell you, with that's one of the things we do is make sure that the paperwork is going in correctly. The only real forms we ever get disapproved are really along the lines of, somebody applies and they have a felon. Well, you're not going to get approved, right?
Sure.
Or, they've been involved with domestic abuse. You're not going to get approved. And we can help people sometimes where that's incorrect in their records, kind of get it fixed. But
Sure.
we don't have many disapprovals other than those types of things.
So if somebody, I didn't know this, so if somebody, some guy's got a domestic abuse charge from 20 years ago on his record, he has firearm rights, he's not a prohibited person, he would be prohibited under NFA from having a suppressor?
That's actually not right. It's
Okay,
basically if you can walk into a store and buy a handgun, you can buy a suppressor. It's
gotcha.
pretty much the exact same requirement.
You're just saying if there was some type of crime on his record that would stop him or
That's
her.
right.
Okay, that makes sense. What happens if a guy lives in a free state um, and he moves to another free state? Does he have to process some paperwork because he's moving?
There is actually not for silencers, but for other NFA items like SBRs, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, machine guns. There's a notification to ATF to tell them you move. But for silencers, that's not even required. So it's
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, it's just a notification though.
What happens if is there any like I know some NFA stuff that you've got to like have paperwork with you and like if a law enforcement officer says like show me the papers like if like can something happen if you don't have the papers?
That really depends a lot on the state. So you should keep a copy. I mean, I always recommend people keep a digital copy on their phone, just a picture of it, right? You shouldn't have the original paperwork with you ever because you don't want to lose it, right?
Good enough. Okay.
But it's a, but yeah, I mean, I've never been asked, right? I asked quite a bit. I asked people, have you ever been asked to see your paperwork? And I don't know of anybody who's ever been asked. Not that it couldn't happen, but I know in Texas, you're still innocent till proven guilty. In other states, they will actually haul you to jail until you can present your paperwork. So it kind of depends on the state, right?
So do you know of a situation where a person had some type of law enforcement interaction and a suppressor came into play and they arrested them for having it and not having paperwork?
And I don't know of anybody personally. There was one here locally on the news, and this is before they changed the laws here, where some guy did wind up in jail, and he had to come up with his paperwork before he got let loose, right? And this had to have been 10 years ago. But I remember seeing that on the news. But since then, the laws in Texas have been changed, right? To where it's no longer, it's explicit in the laws where it says Texas is not responsible for enforcing ATF rules, right?
I see.
Essentially.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So those kinds of situations, I always ask, well, what were you doing that a police officer was tearing your car apart? Or what were you doing when you're walking someplace you're not supposed to be with a weapon? Like, why are we even at this point anyway? Of course, that kind of malicious law enforcement activity can happen, but it's pretty dang rare. I'm sure you were doing
Yeah.
something stupid.
Yeah. And this,
So
man, I tell you, I wish I knew more details about it. I remember it being some guy carrying a gun case into a hotel, right? It was something along those lines, taking it up to his room instead of leaving it in his car.
need
Police
that El
wound up getting.
Mariachi guitar case, then it wouldn't have happened.
That's right.
That's what you need. I might go into that, elmariachishop.com, and we're going to sell guitar cases just for that's my next business. I'm
That's
doing it.
right. There you go.
So you have really made it sound so dang easy. Of course, somebody's got to be able to buy this thing. Um, can somebody, here was a question I was going to ask. Can somebody live somewhere, have a trust somewhere else in like the item? Like, got a buddy that lives in my state, but he has another house in Las Vegas and spends a lot of time there. Could he have a trust in Las Vegas with his cans in the gun safe there, but live in Illinois, or is it based on residency?
Yeah, what you're saying is actually common. I shouldn't say common. There aren't many people who have residences in multiple states, but among people who do, there are a lot of people who live in California, have a residence in Nevada. So they set up a trust in Nevada and keep the silencers in Nevada, right?
Okay.
That's pretty, once again, among people who have multiple residences, that's pretty common.
Could you use a business address? Do you have to have yes?
Yeah, yeah, and you can actually register as a corporation as well. Most people don't. There's a little more complication to it. A trust is generally a better option, but you can register as a corporation.
I'm assuming, Dave, that your website's got all kinds of information, maybe even
Oh
some
yeah.
videos people can watch.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a ton of information on there about getting this stuff done. It really is easier than, especially for first time buyers, it's easier than they think.
I like it. Well, I learned a ton. I appreciate that you spent the time chatting. Every time I interview somebody, I ask the same question that I'm about to ask you, and you can say whatever you want. Can I have a free case of cans? I'm just kidding. I ask them this: if you never run into the people that have listened and viewed this conversation today, what would you leave them with? Any could be anything.
I'll say just visit us at silencershop.com. We've got a ton of information on there. Videos, articles. You find a local dealer that can talk you through stuff. Give us a call, talk about it. I mean, just talking to people all the cans is what we do, and publishing information, right?
I dig it. I appreciate it. Do you make it out to SHOT Show every year?
I do. Yep. I'm one of the very few people who admits I like it.
I don't not like it. I enjoy a lot of it. I don't maybe like it for the same reason as other people. What do you like about it?
Honestly, just seeing people I haven't seen for the year, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a good thing. I don't hate it either. I spend the time and energy to go out there. It's fun to walk around the hotel there and slap people on the back and see all the different folks that, like you said, that you don't see but once or twice a year. That's cool.
That's right.
I dig it. You guys that tuned in today, I hope that maybe we spurred a couple of good ideas in you, not just about making your gun quieter, but maybe about your ability to affect change in the community you live in the state you live in, of course, in the country that we live in. All of these things are not bestowed upon us by government, but we give government its power to do its job. It's important that we remember that. And of course, we got to live as good citizens worthy of such power. Dave, I appreciate you and your people at Silencer Shop. I look forward to meeting you in person, and I hope to chat with you again, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com.